Sudan is a country in Africa, as many of you all know. But something that's been happening lately that a lot of people aren't really aware of. And I'm going to share this article with you guys really quick. And a lot of people aren't talking about what's going on in Sudan, but this is important. And I'll show you, you guys will read the story why. So, this is out of the Black Agenda Report. If you guys have not started getting some of your news from the Black Agenda Report, I actually do highly recommend it. People like Margaret Kimberly and Ajimo Baraka, people like them are also part of the Black Agenda Report. They also do write articles, things like that. This is an article by Dr. Adewahab Sheikh Abdisamad. I hope I pronounced his name correctly, their name correctly. If I didn't, my deepest apologies. Hopefully, I will have you on so that I will learn how to pronounce your name correctly. But this article says a win for Sudan's armed forces, good for democratic transition. And so these two gentlemen here, these two people are basically fighting one another. This is one of the reasons why I said in the thumbnail is a tug of war for Sudan. And what does this tug of war mean? It says the battle between warring generals in Sudan must end with a return to civilian rule. It says in Sudan, two rivalry security forces turned their guns on each other on April 15th after many months of tension between the two groups. On that date, Sudanese citizens were awakened by gunfire and explosions in the capital of Khartoum. These Sudanese armed forces were engaged in fierce battle with paramilitary known as Rapid Support Force in control of the military facilities, airport and streets in Khartoum. At the center of the conflict are Army Chief Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. Sudan's political and security crisis began in April 2019 following months of protests against the country's long-serving dictator, President Omar al-Bashir, and the military seizing control of the country's affairs. Even after Bashir was gone, Sudanese civilians continued with their demonstrations demanding elections to be held and power returned to the civilian government. 4 months later, the military ceded power and agreed to power sharing agreement with civilians, leading the country to an election by the end of 2023. The military, led by Army Chief Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, dissolved the government led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, replacing the power sharing agreement. In November 2021, al-Burhan was sworn in as head of the new Sovereign Council and was sworn in November 21st, and Hemeti was his deputy. So, why is this going on? And this is actually gets into it here. So it says the current disagreement between Sudanese armed forces led by Burhan and the paramilitary force, the Rapid Support Force led by Hemeti, stems from how to conduct the transition from a military rule to a civilian government, and also how the RSF can be incorporated into the army and the authority that should oversee the process. The army raised the alarm over a possible armed conflict after the RSF deployed troops in Khartoum and other parts of the country without the army's permission. The ongoing conflict in Sudan has raised fears of a full-fledged civil war and the spillover effects that could destabilize the entire region. Sudan's air force power was crucial for early stages of the conflict. The Rapid Support Forces targeted airports across the country to ground Sudanese armed forces' air operations. While the tactic only has partially succeeded, the RSF's ability to mobilize soldiers from neighboring Chad makes defeating them in their tribal homeland of Darfur difficult. So this is what's been going on in regards to what's going on in Sudan. And the problem is that you have a lot of people in Sudan. Is it Sudan or Sudan? I'll say Sudan. The problem what's going on with the people in Sudan is that they are really caught in the middle of this. And this is reminding you of another country, isn't it? As you think, as the hamster, runs on the wheel, you're now starting to think about, is there another country that's going on with something like this? Something similar? What country in Europe that's going on with something that's always in the news? You guys are thinking about the country that starts with a U that rhymes with propane, aren't you? And so a lot of this is really just, two factions going against each other over how to institute a civilian government. But is it more than that, or is it less than that? So let's go in a little bit deeper. And this says power games and ideological differences. Burhan is Sudan's current head of state, and Hemedti is his deputy. The country is being destabilized by the armed conflict between the forces they lead. Both men deposed al-Bashir and disbanded the government led by civilian Prime Minister Hamdok in 2019. The two men battling for control of the country differed on the restructuring. Burhan prefers that the RSF, led by Hemedti, be brought under the control of the National Army, but the force, composed of former Janjaweed militiamen, wishes to remain independent. Burhan and the army commander at the time, Hemedti, who led the Janjaweed militia, fought alongside each other against rebels in the Darfur region in the mid-2000s. In the end, the forces committed atrocities and violated human rights in the region. The current clashes have spread to other areas, including Darfur, where two opposing forces are fighting to control of the region. The army launched airstrikes on the RSF positions. So this is really going out of whack, so to speak, in that region. And so I don't want to read this entire article because I want you guys to read the article for yourself. This is just a taste of what is in the entire article. There's a lot to read in this article, but it's also really good to get some more context of what's going on in Sudan. So I'm going to put the link in the chat so you guys can have that as well. But I'm also going to be getting into a couple of clips as well that also explain what's really going on there. Good to see Indy Left on the Rockfin side. Good to see you. All right. So let's share that. All right. So go on to my list. Yes, people, I have a list. I have a list. All right, so let's get this going. All right, so let me share my screen. Go Power Rangers. Okay.
In the Sudan, there's no end to the fighting, and it seems no point in declaring a ceasefire either, because the violence just doesn't stop. On paper, the ceasefire was extended on Sunday for another 72 hours, but Sudan's army continues to bomb the capital, Khartoum. The armed forces are fighting a paramilitary group called the RSF, Rapid Support Forces, RSF. They're fighting for power. The worst hit is Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, also volatile regions like Darfur. Thousands of civilians have fled to neighboring nations. Some are taking land routes to Egypt or Chad. Others are flocking to Port Sudan at the Red Sea. They're trying to board evacuation ships.
السودان عايش في لحظة تعثرات
Sudan is living
بحجمين.
through a moment of real terror. I'm talking about dead bodies in the streets. We smelled the dead bodies as we were coming from Khartoum. The firing, the shelling. Sudan is seriously in a state of real war.
The death toll keeps rising. The official figure is 500. The United Nations has reported a similar number, but it says the actual figure is most certainly much higher. And this is a conflict that the Sudan can ill afford. It was already among the poorest countries in sub Saharan Africa. More than 600,000 children were being treated for acute malnutrition here. Now, the fighting has made it worse. The supply of life saving aid is being disrupted.
It's a very difficult situation in Sudan, and the context is complex in the sense that the scale of this conflict encompasses 2/3 of the country, essentially, the Darfur, Kordofans, Khartoum. So it's a very insecure situation that we're all finding ourselves in. But the work continues. The work is continuing, and we just really pray for peace in those conditions to be able to enable even more delivery of services and scale up of those services.
She says the conflict encompasses 2/3 of the country. Does this mean the Sudan is facing another civil war? Considering its history, this is definitely possible. The army is led by General Abdel Fattah al Burhan, the country's de facto ruler. He took power in a coup in 2021. His opponent is a man called General Mohammad Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. He leads the paramilitary force called RSF. Now, Burhan and Hemedti were allies during the 2021 coup, but since then they've fallen out, and now they've taken up arms against each other. What triggered the fight? Well, they couldn't agree on how the country will transition into a democracy and who will control the RSF. How will it be incorporated into the Sudanese army? Ostensibly, this is what the fight was about. But make no mistake, this is a battle for power. As things stand, democracy is not coming to Sudan anytime soon. Burhan has said he will never sit down with Hemedti. Both groups are backed by foreign governments, and they have their own agendas. There have been repeated ceasefires, but they fail to hold. The threat of a civil war looms.
Did you hear what she said? Both are backed by foreign governments. Of course. Of course. Of course. Why are you surprised? I'm not surprised. Are you? I'm not. Would you like to know who those foreign governments are? All right. Let's find out. Remember that the owl, Mr. Owl? Well, let's find out. A 1, a 2, a 3, 3. Sorry, I couldn't resist. When I said that, I was just like, that reminds me. Yes, I'm that old. All right. So we're going to listen to a Sudanese man talk about what's actually going on in the region. Let's go ahead and look. All right.
Here is why you should care about the fighting that is going on in Sudan. What's happening there is more than meets the eye. And it's time for the world to discuss the actual truth of what is going on there. America and Russia are at it again, just as they did 60 years ago during the Cold War, when they fought proxy wars right in Africa, leading to the death of thousands of innocent Africans. They are at it again in Sudan, fighting a proxy war. Let me explain. Two factions of the Sudanese military are fighting each other. One of them is led by Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan, head of the paramilitary group known as Rapid Support Forces. The other faction is led by the Sudanese Army Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. So why are they fighting? This is where Russia and USA come into the picture. You see, in the last couple of months, Russia has finalized a deal with Sudan to establish Russia's naval base in Sudan's Red Sea coast. America is not too happy with that. Actually, they're furious. America's ambassador to Sudan, John Godfrey, expressly warned Sudan not to seal that deal with Russia, but they're going ahead and doing just that. And so when the paramilitary unit began fighting the other faction of the army, that wasn't happening in a vacuum. The big problem is that you're not going to hear this in the mainstream media. Neither are you going to hear a lot of African governments voicing this, which is very unfortunate, because Africa must learn to speak its truth and stand on this truth, because truth will set you free. So it is left to the African people, we the African people, to speak this truth and tell America and Russia to get off Africa, to get their hands off Africa. The days of the Cold War, the days of the shenanigans of the Cold War are completely over, and they cannot fight proxy wars in Africa at the expense of innocent African lives. That has to stop. The fighting in Sudan must stop. The puppet masters must stop their evil, diabolic games. Here,
He said that the puppet masters must stop their evil, diabolic games. Puppet masters. As far as the United States, because, well, hell, I live here. From what I observe is that the United States is really the foremost puppet master when it comes to different governments and installing, their own dictators over governments. And the United States has been doing this for, gosh, well over 100 years now. And so with that, is it any surprise to any of you that the United States is involved? Put a 1 in the chat if you're actually surprised. Put a 4 in the chat if you're no, you're not surprised at all. Because I'm just like, yeah, I'm not. And so that's why when I first heard this, I was like, of course. Now, what's going on in Sudan is really, what's really going on in Sudan is really just a big tug of war between two powers. And I want to share this tweet as well about what's going on. Hang on. Yeah, here it is. And the Communist Party of Kenya actually spoke out. And here's what the Communist Party of Kenya says. It says, the statement of the Communist Party of Kenya in support of the Sudanese revolution. There is no future for Sudan divided among the warlords and kleptocracy of generals. And as you see, this basically is a photo of Sudan in crossfire. It says the Communist Party of Kenya stands in solidarity with the Sudanese Communist Party, the Sudanese workers, and the people of Sudan against the ongoing reactionary war. The war is being perpetuated by pockets of the reactionary Sudanese army who sold their souls to foreign capital. These minority sections in the army are now openly mercenaries of foreign governments eyeing Sudanese natural resources. The Sudanese masses will be very unforgiving to them. When the revolution started in 2019 under the leadership of Sudanese Communist Party disguised as Sudanese professionals, its aims were people-centric. The Sudanese masses and the Sudanese Communist Party are determined to advance the pro-people revolution. It's unfortunate that the ongoing and intense violence in Sudan continues to compromise peace and put the lives of the poor majority at risk. The Communist Party of Kenya supports these revolutions to the hilt. We all know that the civil war in the making will soon change its character to an all-out revolutionary war against the comprador class. The more radical the more rational call at this hour of need is the immediate unity of all revolutionary progressive Sudanese forces under the firm leadership of the Sudanese Communist Party. The only route left to victory is the route of permanent resistance against the comprador misrule. To compromise with this class will be to auction the Sudanese working class to foreign interests. Any attempt to restore normal life in this interest of capital should be frustrated by the active revolutionary organizations in Sudan. There can never be peace without justice. There can never be peace with the capitalist dictatorship. The march to overthrow the Sudanese reactionary class should continue. And the final analysis of the people shall win. The anti-people generals and the right-wing militiamen in the streets of Khartoum will be defeated and humiliated. The only war worth sacrificing itself is a class war and not a reactionary war that wants to preserve the predator class among the military to continue to suck the country dry. Today, the Communist Party of Kenya raises the solidarity flag higher in solidarity with the Sudanese Communist Party, the Sudanese workers, and the poor majority in Sudan. The victory is inevitable because only just wars that succeed. Long live the Sudanese Communist Party. Long live the Sudanese Revolution. Long live the heroic Sudanese people. Long live solidarity and internationalism. That's from George Kiroy, Secretary of Propaganda and Publicity for the Central Organizing Community of the Communist Party of Kenya. So that's what the Communist Party in Kenya is saying. And really, they are close to Sudan, so they see the ongoing issues that's going on there and what's going on so far a lot better than people like myself here are in the United States are seeing. And this has to be something that is sorry. This has to be something that is stopped as far as the conflict between these two generals, because there is something that is dangerous that could happen. And this is something that I found quite distressing. So
the conflict in the Sudan has taken a dangerous turn. A biolab is caught in the crossfire. Experts call it a potential germ bomb. That's because this lab has disease samples. It stores pathogens related to measles and cholera. There is serious risk of a biohazard. Look at where the lab is situated. Right in the heart of Khartoum, it is surrounded by critical infrastructure. The city's main airport is nearby, also Sudan's military headquarters. It is dangerously close to the lab. The battle is between the Sudan's armed forces and the RSF. It started almost 2 weeks ago, and it looks nowhere close to the end. So basically, everything can go wrong is going wrong.
How would you feel if there was a lab that had infectious diseases in it, and then there were armed conflicts that were happening very close to it? Like, how would you feel? How should the world feel? Right? This is something that really is at the fault of some of these world powers. Particularly, I have to blame the United States, because a lot of times people will expect people like me to go against Russia. And I'm like, yeah, Russia has some bad parts about it too. But I live in the United States, so I'm going to critique my country for perpetuating a lot of the conflicts that happen in these regions. Because why are they perpetuating the conflicts in these regions? I'll get to that in a second. But the problem is that they're literally putting people's lives at risk. And the crazy part is you don't hear too many of these many people talking about this in corporate media. Why? Well, any reason? They'll talk about the Ukraine war day in, day out, and then they'll demonize Russia. Yet, look what's happening in Khartoum. in the heart of Sudan. People are literally getting caught in the crossfire. 500 people hurt or killed because of these two warring generals. Let's continue.
Which is why countries are speeding up evacuations. New Delhi launched Operation Kaveri this week. Close to 3,000 Indians were stranded. They're being brought to safety. And in the days ahead, more people are expected to return home. But a lot depends on whether the ceasefire holds and if it can be extended. The conflict.
So that's another variable that we're seeing that's going on right now in Sudan that really should be considered as well. And like I was saying, why is there such an interest in Sudan, especially from the United States? Come on, guys, say it with me. Resources. Absolutely. Let's go to Encyclopedia Britannica. Resources and power. This is about Sudan. It says oil is a lucrative natural resource. Let me bring this up. Let me expand this. 1, 2, 3. All right. Under resources and power, oil is a lucrative natural resource. It was first discovered in southwestern Sudan in 1977, and commercially viable find was made in 1980. But the civil war in the south prevented any exploitation of the oil deposits until the late 20th century. Sudan's recoverable oil reserves, estimated at 500 million barrels in the early 1990s, was thought to be between 5 and 7 billion barrels in the early 2010s. Upon the secession of the South in 2011, so you have Sudan and South Sudan, the majority of the oil reserves fell within the borders of newly independent South Sudan. Sudan has other known mineral deposits, but not all are exploited. They are gold, uranium, chromite, gypsum, mica, marble, and iron ore. And it also says, despite the hydroelectric potential, only a small percentage of Sudan's electricity is produced by hydroelectric plants. The Sennar Dam on the Blue Nile supplies some electricity to the Jazeera scheme and to Khartoum. And hydroelectric dams also have been built in Kashim, Al-Kirba, and the Atbara River, Al-Rasayaris on the Blue Nile, and Muroe on the Nile. Electricity is largely limited to urban areas and generally is not a common energy resource for cooking. Paraffin, gas, charcoal, and firewood are the primary energy sources to meet either cooking or lighting needs in the country. So when you look at what natural resources are in a country and what's the most abundant, oil, gold, uranium, for the most part. Oil, we know what that's used for. Gold, we know what that's used for. Uranium could be used for nuclear power plants or also nuclear weapons. So, this is why places like Sudan are very important, especially for the interests of the United States, corporate and military interests. Also, Sudan is in the Horn of Africa, which basically is right in the middle of a lot of other countries that are close by, particularly ones like Somalia. So let's go to what the Communist Party of Sudan says. And so this is from Marxist-Leninist Today. Make sure this is big enough so that everybody can see. All right. So this was 2 weeks ago. It says the intense violent military clash between the generals of the Security Committee and their forces is exposing the masses of our people to danger and recklessness of the counter-revolutionary forces' ambitions and to more bloodshed. The clash is a result of the split between the military and civilian forces that assumed the leadership and rule of the country since the beginning of the revolution in April 2019. The victims of the continuing violence and counter-violence are the people who have been striving for the continuation of the revolution and achieving full democratic civilian power. The way back to normal life begins with an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire, the departure of armies and militias from the cities and villages, and keeping them far from citizens' gatherings in towns and rural areas. What is happening now is a continuation of the struggle over power and the country's wealth, encouraged by some foreign powers and being carried out by armed groups subservient to these foreign powers, i.e., United States and Russia. These bloody clashes and their continuation is what our party has been warning about. And they are spreading confusion and fear among citizens. In this context, the Communist Party considers it necessary to speed up the dissolution of all militias, collecting the weapons deployed in cities and rural areas, and rebuilding a unified professional national army. The Sudanese Communist Party calls for unity to demand an immediate ceasefire, the exit of armies and militias from cities to save the country from the bloody infighting among the generals. The unity of our people, all the patriotic forces, the forces for radical change, and the resistance committees in support of the goals of the revolution and the restoration of peace, security, and stability are urgent requirements. It is the only basis to end this current crisis, reclaim the revolution, and establish the power of the people. Freedom, peace, justice, and civil state is the choice of the people. In this context, the Communist Party calls upon the people to protect the neighborhoods and residential areas. The Sudanese Communist Party also calls upon the people of the world and the democratic and communist forces to raise their banners of solidarity with the struggle of the Sudanese people and to restrain the forces hostile to the glorious December Revolution. Central Committee, Sudanese Communist Party. So that's what they're talking about right now. And so they're basically condemning both sides, both generals, both forces about what's going on in their country because it's literally putting people at risk. And people are constantly having their lives put at risk down to this very day. People are being killed. And so there's another clip that I wanted to share with you guys. And this is going to be basically what I've been saying, but I think he says it a little bit better. Why in the world are you continuously? Just don't play. All right, cool. Are we cool now? You're not going to play on me, are you? All right. Whew. Jeez Louise. Technology, I tell you. All right. So let's go.
The bitter rivalry between Sudan's de facto leader and his second in command is tearing apart the African nation. But is this just an internal unrest, or is it becoming another proxy conflict being fought on behalf of larger interests?
We do have deep concern about the engagement of the Prigozhin group, the Wagner group, in Sudan.
Частной военной компании под названием «Вагнер». Это его право, об этом министр иностранных дел Мали.
Will Sudan become the next Ukraine? I'm Shivan Janna. Welcome to Game Plan. Let's get to the point. The current battle in Sudan is between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan heads Sudan's army and is also Sudan's de facto leader since taking over the country in 2021. On the other side, we have Mohammed Dagalo, who was al-Burhan's deputy and who helped him carry out the coup in Sudan in 2021, becoming Sudan's second in command. Dagalo heads Sudan's paramilitary, known as the Rapid Support Forces or the RSF. Now, the two military forces have clashed over a disagreement of merging the RSF with the Sudan army. But is it just that simple? Or are there other interests involved?
The United States remains a steadfast partner of the Sudanese people in their pursuit of a civilian-led government.
US has long been batting for a civilian government in Sudan to bring peace in the nation. But it's never that simple when it comes to America.
No.
In 2019, Abdullah Hamdok became Sudan's prime minister. He had full US support, thereby giving US an upper hand in Sudan. Russia decided to increase its footsteps in Sudan and signed a 25-year agreement to establish a naval base in the African nation, allowing Russia to simultaneously keep up to 4 Navy ships, including nuclear-powered ones, in Port Sudan.
So, you see that? That's what's going on. And, yeah, neocons all up in Africa putting their stink on it.
In exchange, Russia offered to provide Sudan with weapons and military equipment. The agreement, of course, angered US and did not materialize. In October 2021, Sudan's military, with al-Burhan and Dagalo at the forefront, came together and carried out a coup and overthrew US-backed Hamdok and took over Sudan. In September 2022, John Godfrey, US ambassador to Sudan, warned Sudan of consequences if it went ahead with the Russian military base at Port Sudan. In December the same year, a political framework agreement was signed in Sudan for restoring a civilian-led government in Sudan, exactly what US had been batting for all this while, which would have perhaps brought back US-backed Abdullah Hamdok to the fore, giving US an upper hand once again in Sudan. And then in March of 2023, the deal was nearly finalized for a civilian government in Sudan when the violence broke out between the two military leaders in April 2023.
So the United States almost had Sudan back in its clutches. Almost. But now you have two world powers that are really behind, just going, no, Sudan is mine. No, Sudan is mine. You know? And it just sucks because, you know, the only losers really are the people. And so this is why I think it's imperative for us to really change the system here at home so that we can help the people abroad. It's like this. Say, for instance, you have somebody that's on a table saw, right? And they're getting closer and inching closer and closer to the table saw where they're going to get cut to death, right? And you're way over here. And people are stopping you from going to the table saw to turn off the off button. But you look over and you see the plug to the table saw. And you run and you try to fight to unplug the table saw to stop it. Because at least if you can't turn the off button over there, you can unplug it from its power source over here. And that's what is so important for us. Unplugging the power source. The power source that pushes, that perpetuates the suffering of other nations. This is why our solidarity among workers in these nations are so important. It's not just the workers that we have solidarity with in Ukraine. It's not just the workers that we have solidarity with in Russia or China or Burkina Faso or in Vietnam. It's also the workers in Sudan. It's also the working and poor people in South Africa. It's also the working and poor people in Madagascar or in Brazil or in Chile. It doesn't matter, is that we have our solidarity and we have our unity with them, because these governments, particularly the United States government in particular, always has that buzzsaw that's trying to cut, that's trying to destroy in order for people, for not people, for these corporate dictators to have more power. That's really what it's about. And the only way to stop this buzzsaw from our end is really to pull out that plug. Now, we're going to have resistance for pulling out that plug. But the thing is that's the closest to us. That's what we have the most proximity to. And so this is why it's important for us to keep in mind and pay attention to these stories. Because as we pay attention to these stories, we see what's going on here with us domestically, what's going on foreign with other people who are also suffering under the same government that we're suffering under. So this is why it's important for us to constantly battle against what our government is doing, really, in our name. And it takes way more than voting. Way more. Voting is the least. So this is why when we have, anti-war rallies, things like that, hell, if, you can join different organizations so that you can push for more of a concrete change, more of a systemic change, then that's one of the best ways to do it. Because it's not just us suffering domestically, it's other people suffering internationally in other countries at the hand of the government that supposedly listens to us. So when it comes to trying to help the people in these different regions, the best way that we can help is by changing the system here. The best way to help the people in Ukraine is to upend this system here. The best way to help people, especially people in the Donbass, right? The best way to help people in Khartoum and Sudan is for us to change the system here. You want to help the people in Somalia? Let's change the system here in the United States. You want to help the people in Cuba? Change the system here in the United States. It all starts with upending this system that's exploiting them abroad. That's the way I see it. So yeah, that's what's going on right now in Sudan. And it's just terrible, because the people do not deserve this. And it's always the people that suffer in between. Gosh. For a bit of context as to what's going on, this part is going to be viewer discretion is advised. Yeah. So just in case, if you do not like scenes of war, then you may want to turn away. But just letting you guys know. I'm turning the sound off because I don't know if this music is copywritten or not, but as you guys can see, this is what's going on in Khartoum, in Sudan. And this is actually a TikTok video where they're showing what's actually going on. This is why I think apps like TikTok are actually important, because it literally showing us things that the corporate media will not show. And so this is why I feel it to be very important. So. And I just honestly I'm honestly irritated and upset because, you know, while I do have a lot of respect for those of us on the left who are speaking out against the proxy war in Ukraine, I think we all need to start talking about the proxy war in Sudan as well. So that's something I think that we need to talk more about. Make sure. And so if we're going to, talk about proxy wars, a lot of the ones in Africa, we also need to talk about. So it says pray for Sudan at the end. So yeah, pray for the people in Sudan. That's why I just hate seeing people go through things like that. So this proxy war needs to end.